Well, Gabby, how in the world are you?
I'm good, Cable. How are you doing? You've had some great adventures, interesting adventures recently.
Yes, yes. Argentina, red stag, and water buffalo recently. And I've been seeing on your Instagram that you've been doing a lot of fishing.
I have been doing fishing. I was recently at the POMA conference. That was a great event. We're going to be having our next event in Ohio at Maumee Lake State Park. So that should be fun. So any outdoor communicators listening, we've been doing kind of a rebuilding effort. So if you guys are looking to get involved in outdoor media, we are a great hub. We're pro sportsmen. You don't have to know where we stand on the issues. Pro sportsmen, pro sportswomen, and we've had an interesting few years of rebuilding, and so it was good to be there and catch my personal best largemouth bass. That was so much fun
How
in Lake
big was it?
Marion. 5 pounds, 10 ounces
Heck
on
yeah.
like an artificial worm. So it was a lot of fun, like casting directly in front of the cypress trees. Like I've done bass fishing and what you could consider like tournament bass fishing, but this was more challenging to have to like angle it directly in front of the base of the tree and let it sink. So it was
Mhm.
challenging and interesting. And I'm always up for a challenge, even whenever I fish. And I've fished, as you know, for a long time since I was like 8 or 12. And so for me, like learning even new styles of bass fishing is a lot of fun. So I felt really great to have hooked in that lunker and earned the
Yeah.
bragging rights of the conference. And the fishing guide was great. He's a young tournament angler in Lake Marion, really cool guy. And I had another guy from he also does a lot in conservation. Jim from Outdoors Foundation of Conservation or Outdoors Conservation Foundation. I forget the exact. It's
Uh-huh.
a long name, but he does a lot of work. He used to work for NSSF, and we were fishing partners for the afternoon. So he was great, and we had a lot of
Cool.
fun catching
Yeah.
catfish and bass.
What does POMA stand for?
Professional Outdoor Media Association.
Right, right. Okay. And it's open, like all you have to do is apply or
You apply. We're going to be changing, I think, the criteria requirements because it's a little difficult for people to, if they want to become like voting members. Associate member, it's like very easy. You just need like one paid submission somewhere.
uh-huh.
And so for voting media, I think we're going to be tweaking it. You will see for any prospective members, we will be, I think, lowering our membership rate at some point. So it's not going to be as cost prohibitive if you've viewed it as a cost prohibitive means. Because we're just trying to, get with the pace of where everything is going and stay afloat because a lot of outdoor media associations, unfortunately, are dying or shutting down altogether. So we don't want to fall prey to that. So we are changing with the times, not changing our mission, but kind of changing our strategy and tactic.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, you gotta evolve or die on the vine. Those are your options.
Yes.
Um, so I know you saw this and it kind of warmed the heart a little bit to see one of the Colorado wolves that were reintroduced was recently killed by a mountain lion.
Imagine that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't think on the hierarchy of wildlife that a mountain, maybe this is me being naive. I mean, I've seen and I've been to Yellowstone, I've heard wolves. I haven't seen wolves outside of like a zoo setting or hearing them in Yellowstone. Admittedly, I haven't done backcountry hunting like you or maybe some others have. But I always thought like a wolf can overpower a mountain lion. But I looked back on that and I'm thinking the mountain lion has to be a little bit bigger than the wolf, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I would think
So
by
so
size.
here's
Yeah.
like basic wolf and mountain lion biology. People will be like, "Oh, I got a 200-pound mountain lion." Probably not. They exist maybe, like that's like saying I shot a 240-inch whitetail. Okay. Yeah, it could happen, but more like 170, 180-pound male mountain lion is giant. It's gonna have a huge pumpkin head. Like, whoever's holding it, it's gonna have these massive paws. It's gonna look like it's 200 and something pounds, but it's not. And same thing for wolves. People are like, oh, I shot a 150-pound wolf. No, you didn't. Like 115-pound male wolf is giant. That is a big, big wolf. The wolf that I shot in Alberta weighed 94 pounds, and that was a pretty like average size.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's not 250-pound mountain lions, and there's not 175-pound wolves running around out there. But so if you had just say a 100-pound wolf, and it would have to be a big mountain lion to kill it, right?
Hmm.
Let's say over 150 pounds. So yeah, I mean, there's a significant size difference.
Right.
Mountain lion's stronger, has claws. Like it's I think a more adept killer, and it needs to be because it
Hmm.
kills by itself, right?
Hmm.
Wolves not in a pack.
Yep.
They've got sharp teeth and they have endurance. Mountain lion doesn't have a lot of endurance, but like a solo killer, the odds are going to the scale is going to tip in favor of the mountain lion. But I don't believe, and because this was actually happening, I believe I read an article recently I think it was Washington State, where um, mountain lions were killing wolves, not to eat them. That's the thing. They're not consuming them. They're just killing them. It's like a
Just for the heck of
territorial
it.
thing. Yeah, I don't think for fun. They're not going on these killing sprees, but like, yeah, I think it's territorial. It's like they see that as a
Mhm.
threat to, like, inherently, like, nature tells them this thing's going to compete with me for food and territory. I got to neutralize the threat. So they're killing them. All that aside, here's the funny thing is that, and this was the timing was perfect because we have this ballot box initiative threat of, like, they're trying to collect the signatures right now. And I
Mhm.
was talking to Charles Whitwam of Howell, and this past week, the anti-hunting faction has hired 3 agencies to try to collect more signatures because
Oh
they
my
have until
gosh.
July 5th,
Mhm.
and they weren't going to come up with the 200,000 signatures they needed to put this on the November ballot. So they've hired now, spent millions of dollars, 3 agencies that all they're going to do is try to collect signatures. So that
They're
kind of
very
tells you,
tactful.
and
They're
so
they're tactful.
yeah.
But wouldn't it be
What?
nice if they fell short of that requirement? That would be beautiful, like sweet
Yes.
justice
Yeah.
with that. But going back to the mountain lion, of course, you're right. Like, I think it's going to be interesting where all these Denverites and city dwellers in Colorado may come to regret voting by ballot box initiative to reintroduce the wolves, because as you've talked about on your show, as I've talked to Dan and the others who are in
Mhm.
Colorado, to Howell, everyone, we've all noticed that when you take away the science from the managers, the wildlife managers, and you put it in the hands of people, unfortunately, people are not adept at, understanding what it is because they've been too influenced by social media. They're too
Mm.
emotional about these type of decisions. They have too much of an attachment to the animal. This doesn't mean we don't like the animals. Like you, I have a very deep admiration and respect for wolves. I think wolves are awesome. I grew up with mountain lions in my backyard, essentially in Southern California. They were neat. I thought it was
Mhm.
stupid that when they would come to the golf courses, instead of transporting them somewhere else, they would just euthanize them, even if they didn't harm anyone. So
Right.
in California, wildlife managers. So it's like, we don't hate them. We just believe that they have to be managed. And if you manage even just a little bit, you can keep the whole population or all the individuals that are part of a certain segment alive. And California, when you ban mountain lion hunting, I think it's a good case study for Colorado in 1990. I was born in 1991, so this
Uh-huh.
this was affecting me when I was growing up in California. I didn't mountain lion hunt, but the fact that they've banned it and they've kept that prohibition in for 3+ decades, we have seen more recorded deaths of mountain lions by poisoning, by car collisions, by things that are far more, I would say, dangerous to them than I don't even know how many people would have been selected for a tag, but maybe let's say they would have allowed 50 to 100 people to
Right.
harvest a mountain lion each year. It doesn't mean every person's going to notch their tag, but if they had like a select, highly regulated hunt, fewer individual mountain lions would be taken than how many are dying each year, I bet.
Yeah, because the cats are still dying, right?
Yep.
There's the X amount of space can support X amount of cats. That's the bottom line, and that's across every species and every region. It doesn't. When you're having to pay government trappers to go shoot them on a golf course, when you had hunters that were already doing that and paying for a
Mm-hmm.
tag, buying a hunting license, yeah, it's asinine. So yeah, like you said, perfect case study. I was, these people. Part of the problem going back to Colorado is the anthropomorphism of
Mm-hmm.
wildlife. Like, we're going to try to make them like people. Like, here's Disney. That's why that latest Lion King movie that came out a couple years ago, I thought was super problematic because now they don't even look like cartoon characters anymore. Now they just look like real animals that talk. Okay. Uh, so then people become attached to them. Like, they had that one cat that P91 or something that was
Mm-hmm.
living in a park in Colorado. I mean, in California, like a city park. This cat's living there for the last few years of its life. Finally got hit by a car, like you said.
Oof.
Yeah, and they said that wasn't going to be fit to release back into the wild, so they were going to take it to like a sanctuary or something and let it live out its
Live out its
days.
final days. Yeah. Yeah, they
Whatever.
do the same with grizzly bears in the GYE. Like they assign a
Mhm.
number. Some of these bears get human names, and for certain settings, like zoos where we have supporters of hunting. I've talked to a CEO of a Texas zoo, and actually, believe it or not, he told me they do support hunting. Believe it or not, because they have the same common enemies. So sometimes, in a zoo setting, I can be okay with them maybe giving names in that circumstance, but like to wildlife animals, I'm just like, no, because they're more likely to be casualties, I don't know, of nature, of perhaps some human, wildlife collision, or some unforeseen thing like death by poisoning. And so I think you could assign it a little differently, like for educational purposes. Like I think names are maybe okay in that setting, but like,
Harambe.
yeah, yeah. But like to assign it to a wild bear that is not just fixed to one setting. Same with wolves, because everyone's like, oh no, if the greater Yellowstone ecosystem wolf gets out of the park confines, it's going to be open season. It's going to be hunted, because these animals are mobile. They're not going to stay in any one place. So they could, maybe inhabit a national park, but then what if they go outside the park boundary line? So I think we can differentiate it and do that. But yeah, they give it to they give the same kind of anthropomorphizing to grizzly bears. And
Right.
it's great to see a grizzly bear mama with cubs. I love seeing that, but they do certainly get attached. And if they don't understand that region, especially GYE, where, if the cubs are gone and she's by herself, and I don't know if they would have allowed female grizzly bear hunting, because I think you can only take very few sows. Like if the Wyoming hunt would have proceeded, it would only be like 2 sows with no cubs, mostly the males. That's who you're targeting. So obviously we don't want to encourage people to shoot the sows. No. That's not what I'm arguing. But where they do allow that, it's very limited in terms of the stipulation, but no one's going to be outright harming or deliberately wanting to harm a mother with sows. Like, and that's great to see in the wild, but giving them a name and then like, getting too attached, that's
what I've noticed is like the worm is turned, and even the most ethical, law abiding hunters, which I would say is 99.9% of us. So for most of us, me included, it's like, I want wolves and grizzly bears and mountain lions on the landscape. But when you don't let any kind of management plan be implemented, like in the populations get out of control, I don't even blink anymore when I see on social media someone say SSS, shoot, shovel, shut up.
It's like Yellowstone.
Now I'm just kind of like, hey, don't get caught. Like if they're not going to let you manage them, and I'm not saying break the law. I'm going to be very clear. I'm not saying that. But if you do, I don't have a problem with it. Like, especially for, and it's a livestock rancher, my good friend. He used to work for a conservation organization. So you can, like, just for perspective wise, where he's coming from. Well, he's also a bison rancher, and he keeps losing money, right? Bison to grizzly bear predation in Montana. And he's like, I'm going to start shooting every one of them. I'm like, yeah, don't get caught. But that's where his mindset is, because the state won't let, not letting any management take place, coming on his property, killing his livestock is what it is.
That's the problem we have with a lack of enforcement of the ESA, or letting the ESA work as intended, as we've talked about before, because these species, whether they're individual segments, or in totality, I mean, the lower 48 grizzly bear, especially in the GYE, has fully recovered. It should not be listed as critically endangered or threatened. The metrics show it's exceeded carrying capacity. And I think same with I would say writ large, gray wolves. So there's like 6,000 individuals and biologists before Biden. And I think even under Obama, they were saying that wolves have met the threshold of recovery. They can be managed. Management should return to the states. But we've seen this administration put rule after rule, or they've worked with their activist friends to block, sue, and settle, and to force these new rules that put prohibitions back, or put the threatened protections back on these species. And that's why you have these conflicts. You have shoot, shovel, shut up. And that's why I love Yellowstone, because it actually, and it's a very dramatic show, but they actually do highlight in the early episodes of the program, they highlighted this, where they had to take to drastic measures. They shot the wolves and they buried them and they put their collars down the river. I'm saying that's an extreme example, of course, and highly dramatized. Do not do that. But it's going with this kind of hamstringing of the law, not following this law, you're going to be encouraging this bad behavior, or very kind of very unseemly behavior, unless you actually follow the science, allow for a culling, allow for a little bit of highly regulated management. And I know people will see like, okay, so they're advocating for not getting the statutory language in Colorado, but look at that maniac in Wyoming who killed a wolf. I know it's a horrible example, and I'm very angry about that. And I don't know how Wyoming.
You know what Charles told me
What did he say?
He said that he believes that story, the idiot that took the wounded wolf to the bar in Wyoming,
Yeah, the snowmobile
will lead them to get the signatures in Colorado. They're
Ugh.
like using that as a rallying cry.
Awful.
And they went to that guy's social media. I don't remember the degenerate's name, but he apparently he's a lion hunter as well.
See.
And so they found a picture of that, and they're like, "See, look at this guy. This is," and then of course use that to paint all hunters in a negative light. You know?
Yeah. No, it's definitely a hurdle we have to overcome. So I don't know what Wyoming is going to do in terms of like, are they going to change their, because it's related to like a county or a region, right? And I think the penalty should have been a little harder, a little harsher. It's like what, 250, because there was some weird kind of stipulation that he did technically take it legally, even though it was very unethical in terms of how he did it. So I don't know how Wyoming is going to grapple with that.
Okay, is it like personally, if the law doesn't say you can't run over a wolf in a snow machine, he didn't break the law. But where he crossed the line for me is the wolf's hurt now.
Yeah.
Shoot it. Run over again. I don't care what you do. Dispatch the thing. Don't let it suffer. And don't take it to a bar and parade it around. I mean, that was horrific.
Yeah.
But when I did my trapline trip in British Columbia, and this isn't hunting. When you're running one over with a snow machine, it's not hunting, but that doesn't mean that it's not a means to an end. So if the most effective way to reduce wolf numbers is for me just to run it over because I can track it down on the lake or whatever, that I've never participated in that. I would not. But if you're there and you're a moose outfitter and that's your livelihood, and there's a wolf and you're on your snow machine and you can run over it, I mean, I can tell you what they do. So
yeah, as long as it's not like taking the Governor Kristi Noem route and bragging about shooting a dog, that kind of deal.
Yeah.
In those kind of dicey circumstances.
So I heard a little bit about that. So she old yellered her own dog.
She did. She claimed that, I don't know the extent of, we won't dwell so much onto it, but long story short, she claimed this hunting dog, 14-month-old dog Cricket, was very unruly, unmanageable. She kind of changed her story. She said at first it wasn't a threat to her kids, then it was. And she did a lot of damage control. I wouldn't write something like that in the book to show toughness. Like, I've interviewed her twice. She's a tough lady. Like, you can, like, she's pretty unique and ranches and rides horses and hunts and does all this. I think that's like a blemish on her, what used to be previously good image, like of a good, solid conservationist and all that. And maybe she'll recover one day learning from this mishap. But if it was me, I wouldn't brag about that like in a book. Like,
yeah. So just bragging about it. And I've said I've had 2 labs that have died, and I told my wife both times, I was like, I just should take it out and do it myself. Like, one had cancer, and the other one was 14 and had this breathing condition, and she's like, you can't do that, and you wouldn't be able to live with yourself. And I'm like, but yeah, they did. Travis did it in Old Yeller. He's fine, you know. And Travis is sitting there crying the whole time doing it, obviously, when he has to put Old Yeller down. I don't have a problem with it if you're going to do that. I don't think I can do it, but don't put it on social media. Like, if that's
and don't have your ghostwriter include it in a book. That was also very problematic. And I'm just like, please stop. Like, who's advising you? Don't do this. Like, and it's just like
some people have that weird thing. They're like, this is my dog. I want to do it myself. This is the end of the deal. And if anyone's going to do it, I'm going to do it. I understand. It's fine. Same thing with a horse, right? Some people,
any animal, livestock. I mean, sometimes you have to take drastic measures. I learned a few years ago that a pet chicken I had who was attacked by raccoons, my dad said that she died, naturally of causes, but I learned that he actually had to, twist her neck. Because he didn't want to tell me the story. I was already mortified with raccoons, doing it, but I would never include my dad killing the chicken in the book,
right?
in a book if I wrote a memoir in the future.
Yeah.
It was just an unfortunate thing to put her out of the misery because she likely contracted rabies. But it's just like, there's certain things, kind of like this wolf thing, like, don't brag about it. Like, even if it's kind of murky,
if you're gonna run over a wolf in a snowmobile, it stays right there. That's it. That's the end of it. Like,
So I don't know why. I think the attempts by animal rights activists to cancel Wyoming is crazy. They're like, don't visit the state, don't go to national parks, to punish them. And I'm thinking, like, this is such a stupid thing. Of course, the animal rights activists will do this, and then they'll use that example to be like, all hunters are like this. And we will have to, for the rest, although it's kind of like gotten out of the news cycle with everything going on, I don't think it's going to be like top of mind for Wyoming voters
It
or
hasn't been as
most
bad
voters.
as Cecil the Lion. That was the
No,
worst
no,
thing
no,
we
definitely
faced
not. And
in
we know
my
how
career.
to organize against that type of rhetoric and be like, hey, let's differentiate between what is ethical, what is good versus not good, because nope, like we were talking, none of us think that's an ethical way to go about it. It's a horrible, horrible example.
Terrible.
Horrible. Nobody should do that.
Anytime an animal is wounded, you have a moral, ethical obligation as a sportsman to, if you can. Now, I understand sometimes
Unlegal,
legality interferes with this. Like if you see a animal hit on the side of the road, well, there's a problem. If it's like, what if it's in city limits? Okay, well, you can't fire a gun there. So then,
No.
then you have to like, okay, well, I'm going to call the, game warden or whoever to come deal with it. But if you're there in the wilderness, like there's no situation where I wouldn't put it down. I don't know. That whole thing is, people are bred different. That guy's a weirdo. That's just, it is what it is. Degenerate is what I'll just call him. But so going back to this Colorado thing, they want to protect mountain lions. And here we have a mountain lion killing the thing that they just spent all this time and money and investment in. Did you see the photo? I thought it summarized it beautifully of the day that Governor Polis released the first wolf, and he's standing there smiling, and all the biologists are standing there frowning around
They're
him.
like, oh, what's going on?
Like,
There's like a hostage situation.
Yeah. Well, and have the two of us talked about his husband? And his rampant,
I think so. I've talked about this with, I think, with Dan.
Yeah.
And his husband, what he explained to me was so interesting, and this could bleed into our conversation about BIDEH too.
He said he's steering the boat.
Yeah, it's the husband is definitely the one who influenced him here.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because like they have stacked their friends, these animal rights friends, in all these different departments and agencies and affiliated groups. So because they merged the parks and wildlife together, Dan was explaining to me that they may potentially in the future, if they haven't done this now, mismanage Pittman-Robertson dollars, which are supposed to go to hunting and fishing, as we know. So there's a worry with this statutory language coming about, which would enable those PR dollars. Let's say if this were to go into effect, if it gets on the ballot, passes by ballot box this fall, there is worry that Dan said that PR dollars could be stretched thin or misappropriated. That's a big concern that we have to worry about with that. But yes, it's just so interesting that, and it's very easy. Like these people are not hiding their connections or their animus towards true conservation.
So right now I'm trying to look up the history of the National Wildlife Refuge System, because that's where we're going to go next. Let's see if we can figure out when that came around. I don't have that in my notes here for this conversation. But where we're going to go with this is there was a proposed rule called, I think it was actually an adaptation to an existing rule, BIDEH. Then I watched that on your social media, and I did some more sleuthing and uncovered some pretty damning stuff. So we'll get into all of that. But historically, let's find out. And you mentioned on your social media, BIDEH has been around for what?
25 years.
25
yeah,
years.
It stems from, and I'm going to read this from the rule exactly because it's okay to have notes for something as convoluted as this and complex. The National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act of 1997, I think, is when BIDEH was first introduced as a concept, to my knowledge, or at least perfected with that. And it has been, the Wildlife Refuge System has been around at least for several decades, from my understanding. And there are 436 properties of 570, 580 that hunting is permitted on. So it's a good chunk of most wildlife refuges.
It came around in 1903, established by the great Theodore Roosevelt. So there's your history there.
There we go.
Yeah. So right at 120 years. And now we have in 2024 an attack on this, which if you read their mission statement, when I think National Wildlife Refuge System, I think conservation. It's a refuge. A refuge means wildlife come here, hang out. It's a great place for you to be. Okay. But I also think hunter opportunity. So it's a win-win. It's a win for wildlife. And part of their mission statement is for hunter, angler opportunity. It's places dedicated for wildlife, which obviously attracts sportsmen and the activities that we like to participate in. So when you have this new BIDEH proposal, talk about shutting. Well, how many of the refuges? Was it talking about?
436 of 570, 580. So it's almost like 80% around that number.
That they're just going to close off?
Well, they would put restrictions as to, if it doesn't fit BIDEH, which stands for, if anyone is like, what does this stand for? It means biological integrity, diversity, and environmental health. That's what the acronym stands for. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a trigger word in 2024.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So what we can surmise from this rule, if it were to be enacted and finalized, is that from their own wording, they think that there's too much management, whether it's predator control or agriculture practices or mosquito repelling. I mean, they list like a couple other factors, not just predator hunting and others. They call them anthropogenic stressors. So since these are anthropogenic stressors in their view, they have to make them into preserves. That's the goal here. And by doing so, how do they make them into a preserve? You say we have to prioritize some other extraneous fight. So for them, they want to put management on par with, or perhaps even supersede. They want to put fighting climate change above the true stated mission of the wildlife refuge system.
Right.
And this is not just an isolated incident, and I'll explain a little more, but by doing this, you're going to be, when you put some extraneous priority over what the explicit mission statement is, what's codified into law, and the mission statement of the refuge system, you're going to have an imbalance, and you're going to have definitely a loss of access. As we've seen and talked about before, Cable, and your listeners know this, the Fish and Wildlife Service has been dipping into this really controversial policy. Where it stems from is from Biden's Climate Day One executive order. If listeners don't believe me, go to his Day One executive order. It basically states everything in my administration, including the conservation policy, is going to be prioritizing climate over everything else, even if prioritizing climate is not necessarily scientific, because it's emotional or it's political.
Yeah.
Well, and with that, yeah, it opens a lot of doors, and we've seen this decision with the lead phase outs on the same refuge lands on 8 areas, 2 of which are directly in my area, my metro region. So 2 of the 6 wildlife refuges, I won't be able to use lead going forward.
Well, surely there's science that supports that.
Right. Yeah, actually, not so much. And even believe it or not, the CDC and the NIH have said that shooting, when they did an analysis, I think for the NIH CDC, I think it was 2007, North Dakota. I've cited this study before. They found that the blood level alcohol content difference between venison with lead shot versus not was like a 0.03 difference. So it's minuscule, like scientifically null. So the science can be easily challenged. And if we would see science that supports it, you would see the industry say, no more lead shot, no more lead bullets or tackle whatsoever. But you don't see the fishing or hunting industry saying that because they know that it's not scientifically valid at this point in time. Everyone's like, but waterfowlers are doing this. It's a little bit different with waterfowlers. And it can be an isolated, slight difference. But the whole hunting activity or fishing activity as a whole, there's not really much science right now to support it, even though they've been creating a mirage of that, because they conflate lead fragments with pure lead. Like they think people are ingesting blocks of lead. Like, that's how.
Oh, I don't think they care about people.
No.
I think they care about bears and like, I feel like they're more concerned with the scavengers and predators. You shoot an elk. You leave the carcass. Oh, a black bear ate a little tiny fragment of a bullet. That didn't kill the black bear. I'm sorry.
No.
Jeez, how stupid do you have to be? Now, it was affecting California condors. It was affecting waterfowl. We've corrected those issues. It's not affecting other species on a large scale. And we don't micromanage wildlife by the individual. We do it on a population level.
Right.
So we have ammunition sales, which are the number one, like my understanding, the number one generator for Pittman Robertson dollars is ammo and guns. So, okay, now we're going to say lead ammo, which is the number one type of ammo sold. We're going to ban that? No, there's no science to support that because of all the money that it's funneling into conservation. If one black bear died, okay, that's sad. think about all the other habitat that's preserved by those dollars. Like anyway, it was Mark Olivet over at the NSSF.
Mark Olivet, yes, yeah.
Yeah. He's the one that told me, like, and this was years and years ago, early in my career. We don't manage on a individual level. It's a population level. So yes, maybe but and again, the amount of lead that one bear would have to ingest to kill it, I mean, he'd have to eat like a box of bullets. So
seriously, yeah. I mean, because that conflation is not debunked often. And I've gotten into this with some people on Twitter too. And Mia Anstein came to my defense, and she's like, you must be, I'm paraphrasing her, but she essentially called these critics, these are kind of like these like very soft, I don't know if these are hunters. They may like occasionally go hunting once a year, but these kind of like more weak-kneed guys who were like, oh,
it sounds like
like
Texans for Mountain Lions crew.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. These were Northeastern guys. And Mia was like, if you must be afraid of the environment around you because lead is everywhere. Like go touch grass. And so it was really funny how she said it. I don't want to take her words out of context, but it was really hilarious that they're so clueless about lead being around you. And again, nobody's encouraging. I would never ingest lead. And I think that's like demeaning of hunters and anglers to be like, well, you guys are so careless. You're just going to like let lead like sit there. I'm like, I hate it when people leave shells, fragments on public lands or wherever I go. I hate people who litter. Like, you're not supposed to do that if you claim to be an environmentalist, and you want to leave the area better than you found it. So to assume that all of us are reckless and careless or like FUDs who are doing this, it's a horrible representation or categorization, or rather kind of a blanket broad brushing painting of all hunters to be like, well, they're stupid. They don't know how to leave their surroundings better. It's very few people who are actually doing it. The numbskulls who do it don't represent us. So again, we have to do that. So back to this BIDEH thing.
I don't see them complaining about the environment down on the border. I mean, look at that.
No, actually, it's actually a brewing environmental disaster. No one's talking about this.
Right. But you would think that these yahoos would be concerned, but it doesn't fit their agenda.
No.
So they're like, it's fine.
I actually think, and I think it's debatable whether or not a border wall is actually as environmentally disastrous as they claim to be. I was watching that documentary. It was, I don't remember. Maybe it's the same guy who's behind Texans for Mountain Lions. And I was watching that, and I was like, okay, so they claim that Trump wants to build a border wall on the national park. I was watching that and I was like, there's already natural walls there. They're not going to build a wall on the national park. Like, so they were saying like, it's going to harm these beautiful places and spaces. And I was like, no, you already are showing us in your documentary that that's not going to happen because it's impossible to build or construct in these.
That guy's a nice filmmaker. All he does though is put out propaganda.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
But I agree. I think the damage to wildlife refuges, believe it or not, like how much waste, how much litter, how much, possibly poaching of wildlife is going on there. We don't hear anything from the Fish and Wildlife Service. They don't care. No. So that kind of take, but it goes back to this greater thing. You ignore actual problems, and then you create a solution in search of a problem, which is what this BIDEH rule is doing. And I actually want to read for your listeners. Here's the spear on the take of this. So it says, as the refuge system becomes increasingly vital to addressing the dual threats of biodiversity loss and climate change, the service recognizes the need to codify both existing and new practices for maintaining BIDEH to assist refuges in responding to these contemporary conservation challenges. So biodiversity loss, who do they think is contributing to biodiversity loss? Is it us, the hunters, who pay for this? Are they replicating that? And I think it's very prudent, Cable, to share with your listeners, what did you find? So who is leading this policy? Because you dug deeper than I did even in this. But if they're saying that there's biodiversity loss with this twin threat of climate change, so to speak, that leads me to believe that they believe that hunters are complicit or responsible for biodiversity loss. We've talked about this before, where that's not true. We're responsible for boosting biodiversity, but I think it's important to talk about your findings.
A good way to summarize that or put that into perspective is, okay, if you fund a National Wildlife Refuge with $100, is it just the ducks that benefit? No, it's every species, because there's that protected habitat for any animal. There's no border there. It's like South Texas. There's no border. You can just come and go. Like, same thing for wildlife. So everybody wins.
But I think your listeners would love to, if they haven't seen your social media posts, you dug really deep. Like, you even investigated more than I did. I should have looked further to be like, who's actually crafting this policy? And if it's probably the same woman who helped influence this rule to say that we have to fight biodiversity loss and climate change. And we have seen studies that point and blame hunters for biodiversity loss, even though our actions show otherwise, especially here in North America. So you should share your findings, I think, with your listeners.
Sure. So broad scope. Okay. Biden gets elected. He nominates Deb Haaland for Secretary of the Interior. SCI, other pro hunting conservation entities pressure her for if they can get a commitment for no net loss hunting policy from her, which she wouldn't do, meaning we might take stuff away. I don't know. We'll see. We'll just have to see how it goes. Okay. Well, Secretary of the Interior oversees U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's under her umbrella, which oversees the National Wildlife Refuge System. So there's your hierarchy as we are looking at things. And then I found out a lady who is writing the policy for the National Wildlife Refuge System is a gal named Jenny Keatinge. She's from California, so strike one. And her history is as storied as the day is long when it comes to being involved with anti-hunting groups. This is her LinkedIn page. Jenny Keatinge, Conservation Policy Advisor, National Wildlife Refuge System. And she's been with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 2 years, since 2021. Before that, Policy Council for Fearless Advocacy, Inc., worked to advance strategic legislation and administrative initiatives on behalf of environmental and animal welfare organizations. Wow. Okay. I didn't even know what fearless advocacy was, but I damn sure know the next three. It's the trifecta of anti-hunting organizations. Senior Federal Lands Policy Analyst at Defenders of Wildlife, 2019 to 2020. Before that,
Strike one.
California Wildlife Policy Specialist for the Center for Biological Diversity. Ugh. There's strike two. And then if you go back even further in her employment history, she was an intern, state of affairs intern for the Humane Society of the United States in 2011. So her entire career, there's other stops along the way in there, but her entire career has been one of pushing an agenda of animal rights activism. And this lady is writing policy for a refuge system that's been around 120 years, as we laid out, who functions to serve sportsmen and anglers and wildlife. You know, it's a win-win. And now she's trying to undermine that. And I think it goes back to this new, it's not a new concept, but they're just now like, I think they're okay, like putting it out there. That's what they're doing. It's the hunter replacement theory.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem with, and you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, and I want to go back to this word, preservation. Preservation is not conservation. Deb Haaland is a preservationist. And that's why we have now this preservationist lady with this incredible anti-hunting career she's built writing policy. The problems with preservation, for me, it's like, maybe that worked 200 years ago, right? Just let the animals sort it out. But when you start talking about, well, now there's 340 million people in this country and more coming in every day, there's the space is limited for wildlife. So it has to be managed in confined spaces. And when you leave them to their own devices, it does not work. It just simply doesn't. And so that's that's the first issue. Second issue is there's no money created through preservation, because you take sportsmen out of the equation, anglers out of the equation, nobody's paying for it. So it's destined to fail from a biological standpoint. Animal predators are going to eat themselves out of house and home. Then they're going to be trying to get off of the refuge and go somewhere else. And then there's no money. So it's not funded. So those are the two biggest issues with the idea of preservation over conservation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this goes back to the greater theory. That was interesting, the hunter replacement theory. You have to somehow popularize it a little more, but that's what these preservationists, I would even venture to say they're rewilders. They kind of fall in the same camp. So they believe that humans are inordinately, irredeemable. We have caused all this carnage on the landscape. even though that we've kind of checked ourselves at the turn of the 20th century and we're like, no, we want wildlife. We don't want to do market game hunting. We've put a check on ourselves. That's why we created the wildlife agencies. We have Pittman Robertson, Dingle Johnson. We don't want to go back to that. But like you said, we have this new equation where we don't want to pull people. So we can, and we don't want to jeopardize our economy, but we still want to preserve things and conserve things because we want to have wild spaces. We want trees. We want wildlife to enjoy and pursue. We want to not just be a concrete jungle, the whole country. And so these environmentalist, preservationists, rewilders want us to go back to a pre-settlement America, which is impossible to ever do. And like you said, the reality of that will be predators attacking each other. You'll have no forest management. You'll have no wildlife management. And it's a horrible,
I'm okay with that as long as it's mountain lions attacking wolves. Well, I think we should selectively breed mountain lions for Colorado that just kill wolves, right? Especially if they vote to protect them. Okay, fine. Yeah.
You want this, you got this.
Yeah.
But it's just this thinking, it's not rooted in reality, and everyone knows this, and it'll totally undermine the North American model of wildlife conservation. But the goal is to displace us because they want to make wild areas their playgrounds. And so they insist on a wilderness area. I don't know if you've paid attention to this or spoke to my friends from Florida at some point, but Holland and Company just basically made 120,000 of 700 some odd thousand acres of a national preserve in Florida wilderness. So you can't do any hunting, you can't do any airboating, you can't do any scientific inquiry. So it's not just the West. They're even doing this in the very few public spaces, multiple use or public land spaces here on the Eastern United States too. So this death by 1,000 cuts philosophy is going to impact you, and especially this wildlife refuge rule with the 436, which I bet of all those that are huntable, at least one in every state, especially in the lower 40. Like everyone's going to be affected somehow or another. So it doesn't seem like a wide sweeping policy, but it is, because if you go there and you hunt and you realize, oh no, they're going to change how management is prioritized to put this above it. So they're going to create a preserve, essentially let things run wild. Where am I going to go public hunting for predator control or mosquito management or all these other so-called anthropogenic stressors, which are maybe not as stressed and as problematic as the Fish and Wildlife Service is making it out to be. But these agencies under the tenure of Deb Haaland have been captured, and I hate to use the term woke, but it really has, their mission statement is really embodying a lot of this wokeness. I would say specifically for this issue, ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, which is very similar to CRT, DEI. I won't bore the listeners with that, but the E in ESG is this whole climate first over everything else, even if the climate science is extremely questionable or the demands of the climate goals are never going to be met. So you will never achieve net zero. Like it's impossible to do it. And as we've talked about before a little bit, the alternatives to what we have could be actually worse for the environment. This whole push for solar, wind, utility scale without any checking or accountability for these companies who will get carte blanche to destroy high habitat.
I mean, we know where cobalt is mined. It's mined in the Congo. Do you think that those workers, who are they selling the cobalt to? Tesla? I think Tesla's taking really good care of, it's contracted out, but they don't care. And the American consumer doesn't care because they don't see it. They don't see the 12-year-old kid working in, they call them artisanal mines, which sounds like it should come with a nice plate of cheese and a glass of wine. But no, it's hell on earth for these people. And it's basically indentured. It's modern-day slavery. Then nobody cares. And then once the lifespan on an EV is like 7 years for these batteries, and then what the hell do we do with them? Number one, you have to buy a new battery. They're like $10,000 or $12,000, which is probably
even 18,000. Almost what used to be the cost of a used sedan, like a basic sedan. You're paying almost the same thing. So it's really funny to see this administration greenlight save the environment by destroying the environment philosophy. Then they're removing, like you said, the hunter replacement theory. They're removing people who are the true conservationists from the landscape, and then they may, with their policies, ironically and unsurprisingly, create more environmental dysfunction than what conventional, let's say, energy development is. And if you claim to be for clean energy, nuclear is the only, I still like fossil fuels. I like oil, gas, coal. I think those industries have been unfairly maligned. I dislike it when they cave to the wokesters. They can do a better job of not, subscribing to that and not feeling guilty. And then what people forget is in these, different energy companies and industries, you have a lot of hunters and anglers. So why would hunters and anglers who work in energy want to destroy the environment carte blanche? However, with this kind of insistence, again, this climate directive, which is affecting this BIDEH policy, why is it that they get to be ignored with potentially destroying the environment with their Western Solar plan, with their BLM conservation landscape and health rule? They're basically getting carbon offsets or these mitigation restoration leases, also similar to kind of what's happening at Interior. They're going to be given the green light to do their projects, doesn't matter what the impact is on the environment, because they have to fulfill their net zero goals. So they tell us we're ruining the environment, but perhaps government is actually encouraging the destruction of the environment, turning a blind eye
that
with
deeper
this.
because I've heard about this, and I haven't done a piece on it or hadn't anyone on to really dive into it. But
sure, briefly,
they're putting solar farms
on 22 million acres of public lands out west. That's their ideal goal. They have 5 proposals
on public land.
On public land, yeah, that they tell us that oil and gas and coal are destroying, even though I've never seen a project of conventional energy take up that much land. Like, I've never heard of a proposal needing 22 million acres to catalyze solar. And actually, you saw some groups that would normally be for renewable energy in our space condemning the solar plan. I was shocked to see BHA and a couple others be like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing? But they're going to double down on this plan unless they get a lot of negative. The only way that I've seen this administration change their opinion, maybe the same for BIDEH too. Everyone has to submit comments and be like, this is a terrible policy. What are you doing? They only respond to a lot of negative backlash or negative pressure or a lot of negative comments or the threat of lawsuits, really, to stop bad policy. So the solar plan, it kind of ties into this conservation landscape and health rule in terms of a funding mechanism. I see the connection where with these restoration mitigation leases, they have a hypothetical scenario in their fact sheet that says, if a solar company develops on high habitat, they can be eligible for a mitigation restoration lease if they promise to restore lesser quality habitat after destroying high quality habitat.
Oh, good, because that's what the animals need is lesser quality habitat.
Yeah. And then they're like, well, you're still going to have access here and you're going to do this. And I don't trust this administration with how many.
You take your solar farms and shove them right up your ass. How about that?
and it's funny, Cable. I agree with you there. You say it more to the point. I'm going to be more ladylike and more composed with it, but I do agree with the sentiments there. But I'll let you say that. But I fully agree with the sentiments. But I just don't understand how you can claim to be for wildlife and conservation, and then you greenlight this monstrosity. And maybe
you know what it is? It's what I say with you're the biggest oxymoron I think right now in this space that we're in. The Democrat hunter. How are you voting Democrat and calling yourself a sportsman? And they'll hang their hat on, well, we're trying to work on corner crossings in Montana. And I'm like, okay, that's a very minute thing that I think we could have a bipartisan approach to a lot of this stuff. It's not that Republicans by and large don't want to take away your public lands, right? And I'll fight for you on that front. But you're shooting yourself in the foot and shooting giant holes in our collective boat on so many more things, like voting against the Second Amendment. You're voting for you're voting for the destruction of habitat to put solar panels on. You're voting for refuges to be closed to hunters and anglers because you've got a lady who's like, I couldn't believe when I saw the places that she'd worked, and now she's writing policy for the National Wildlife Refuge System. Jenny Keatinge. Y'all should look her up on LinkedIn. It's very impressive. Really, really impressive resume. But this is what you're voting for? And so it either comes down to this, like, you're really, maybe like hunting is something that you do once a year or something. It's really not that important to you, and these other things are more important to you. Or you're just hoodwinked. You're so maybe it's Trump derangement syndrome. I don't know what it is, or social issues. But like, I don't know. The most important things to me are like, well, I would put protecting my kids up there, but then after that, it's protecting the Second Amendment and protecting our rights as sportsmen and sportswomen. Like, I don't know. I don't get the Democrat hunter, but that's
I think there may be a turning point, because we saw Andrew McKean of Outdoor Life actually really chastise this administration. I think he leans a little more center left, if I'm not mistaken. And if you had him condemn this policy, this kind of obtuse policy, what are the other true conservationist people who may be more center left thinking? And he wields a lot of influence. So I think people are paying attention to what he's writing to. So I think we could get some people who may have been stubborn or like very viscerally anti-Trump to be like, we at least had these rights respected under him, and he didn't overtly take away land. He didn't. That was a whole misnomer about him taking away like public lands. He just shrunk the monuments. Like he didn't privatize it. I don't remember any tract of acre privatized under his administration.
Look at Alaska. How many millions and millions of acres has Deb Haaland been responsible for closing
60
to
million.
caribou and moose hunters? You know what? I have never hunted Alaska, but I own that land.
Yep.
It's my land. And she closed it to me and without any science backing it up. So again, preservation, we're just going to close it off to you guys and let the animals sort it out. Okay. It's not conservation, lady.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I always talk about, conservation we know is not supposed to be partisan. It's supposed to be nonpartisan. But I do a speech, conservation is conservative because it inherently is conservative. Politically, it fits very well. You want to conserve good stuff and you want to hand down those traditions and make sure their longevity is continued through future generations and whatnot. And, Democrats may have to grapple with this if they see that their ilk in the various different states or federally are voting for or supporting these rules. They may have to call into question. I don't know if they're going to change their politics, but they have to hold their people accountable. Like we've talked about before with the Return Act and the sometimes stupid takes that Republicans take. I'm happily able to I'll happily call out Republicans who either support the wholesale transfer of public land or support really stupid things like the Return Act. I think that's not representative of all Republicans or conservatives.
Representative Clyde has been on the show. Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, senators from Utah and from my state, they're on record of saying, well, public land maybe not that important. Okay, I'll fight you. I'll fight you over that stuff. But what good is the public land to me if I can't have a rifle to take there?
Yeah. I don't know why people make it a debate between you have to put one versus the other. I think even the National Wildlife Federation put out a poll that said conservationists, people who hunt and fish, put Second Amendment on the same equal footing as conservation. And they tend to be Republican and conservative. This was done about 11 years ago. But I think a lot of those findings hold true today. But I don't want to have to choose between the two because I can't imagine a world where I can't have the Second Amendment and then I also can't have access to land. Like what tools am I going to use on public lands if I can't use a gun? Because what if they prohibit bow archery on public lands?
Oh, they will, because the hunter replacement theory doesn't stop at a gun.
No.
But so here's what I would say. If you are a Democrat hunter, okay, I don't agree with it. Hold your party accountable, because 99% of all anti-hunting legislation, I would say 100%, comes from the left. It does. It's this just like we have this lady here, Jenny Keatinge, writing this policy for the National Wildlife Refuge System. You don't have conservatives doing that. So you need to police your own house, get your own house in order if you're going to keep voting that way. Because right now it's out of control. So either come join us or clean your shit up. I don't see, there's no other way about it. That's if you're going to keep voting that way, I'm going to keep calling you out because nothing's changing.
It is easier to influence Republicans too, but we even have some who may fall susceptible to the animal rights cause. I'm seeing that not like tangibly, it's not like overt, but we are seeing some people starting to get captured by that movement too on our side. So we got to hold them accountable too. And I think Republicans are a little more swayable than Democrats to support hunting, support fishing. I mean, we look at, and I know we're going to wrap this up very soon, but if you look at what's happening on the recreational fishing side offshore, I don't know if you follow the commerce rule. They're going to be closing down potentially, I would say, most of the coastal shoreline between Maine to coastal Georgia.
Is this for the stupid whales?
The vessel rule, yes. So they're saying that it's the fishermen and the boaters are harming the whales, even though actually the greater threat, we have to talk about this more openly and comfortably. It's offshore wind, that same area where they want to put these slow zones. That's, I think, where they're planning to put a lot of the turbines, not coincidentally. So they want to and I've talked to people on the recreational fishing side, and I think they have told me that they're putting unofficially, kind of what they've told me, they've put the interest of ocean industrialization over boating and fishing. So we're seeing this even happening with fishing, which is more popular, not as controversial, so to speak. than hunting. So if they can restrict hunting fishing this manner, what's to stop them from stopping different forms of hunting gradually? So it all is intertwined. It's all related. And
What's the
you're
guy's
seeing
name?
a
Mike
Democratic
Leonard? Is it Mike
administration doing
Leonard?
this.
Mike Leonard from the American Sport Fishing Association. Have you ever talked to him?
Yeah, I know Mike. Yeah, he's great.
Yes.
He's
so
great.
I had him on one time to talk about the whales are called right whales.
Yes.
And they were named right whales because historically whalers would say those are the right whales because they were the stupid ones that they could kill. That's how they got the name.
Oh, I didn't know that's how they got the name.
Those are the right whales to pursue because they're the easiest ones to kill.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, fast forward 2024. There's data out there that says that like these whales are getting hit by recreational fishing vessels like one every 5 years. They're not doing well because of fishing vessels. They're not doing well because sometimes, and I hate to say it, but sometimes some species just don't make the cut anymore. That's just the way the world will go. I mean, that's things go extinct for a reason. We hope that it's not because of humans, right? I don't think these whales, I don't know if they are going to have a place on this planet, whether we, reduce fishing vessel speeds or not.
Yeah.
I really don't.
There's really, again, it's with this whole
I want 'em
decision
here,
about hunting.
but
It's the same actors, CBD, NRDC, Humane Society. They filed the lawsuit to trigger the rule creation for the vessel speed reduction for 6 months of the year from Maine to Florida, essentially. So it's the same actors using unfounded science to say that and implicate boaters and anglers for the plight of the right whale, even though there are other stressors now that are far more negatively impactful against them. Like I venture to say, and I even have read a letter, this is not coming out of thin air. One of the NOAA fishery scientists said that offshore wind does have an effect on these right whales. He hasn't been brought before Congress yet, but he has put out the letter there with the letterhead saying, Biden administration, please take my findings and notions very seriously. So it has been put out there, and more people are seeing that connection, because if you hit a whale with your vessel, they want to do it for 35 to 60 feet vessels, a whale is going to be a lot larger than the vessel in question. And they're conflating commercial with recreational. And again, I don't want all commercial fishermen to be blamed for, I think it's wrong to blame all of them for that, for clashing deliberately into whales. But also, whether you're commercial or recreational, you don't want to clash with the whale, because do you know how much the fines are for violating the ESA for the right whale and the Marine Mammal Protection Act? You're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. You'll go to jail, like for deliberately crashing into the whale. So they know how to avoid the whales. There's technology. I was at a congressional boating conference. That's where I got to recently catch up with Mike Leonard and also Jeff Angers of the Center for Sport Fishing Policy. And I got to see the technology, private technology, believe it or not, that they're using to track whales, but the federal government doesn't want to listen to them.
Well, if we can put a 6-inch plastic worm on a largemouth bass's nose because of the technology that we see on our computer screen right there on our bass boat, then they damn sure can see a whale with sonar or whatever it is. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. But unfortunately, Gabby, we got to wrap this up. I have certainly enjoyed the visit. The one thing we didn't get into was them proposing to helicopter grizzlies into Washington State.
When they finalize that rule, let's revisit, because it's going to probably be finalized soon.
Yeah.
Has to be
another great idea. Keep voting Democrat. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. Sorry. All right. Thank you so much, Gabby. I appreciate it as always. I look forward to
an honor
our
and a
next
pleasure.
visit.
Thank you, Cable.
Yep. Take care.
You as well.